portion of them are included in that total. The capital requests that I was just speaking to on the previous page, a portion of that number is included in the list here, so you can see the projects that they're working on. The remaining amount, because I'm going to go back to this previous slide, you can see the proposed budget for capital expenses is 2.985. What we've documented here is a majority of the large projects. The remaining budget is for routine water plant and distribution line maintenance and operations. So I wanted to make sure that I made that point. So here are the projects, or the specific capital requests for larger projects that are being asked for by utilities. Okay, moving forward into within the Sanitary Sewer Fund, the 2020 priorities and initiatives include infrastructure repairs, again, a portion of the upgrading the utility billing system, and the master plan and condition assessment of the sanitary sewer system, and the rate and fee study. So the major requests, a staffing seasonal utilities billing specialist position. I mentioned that a portion of that would be paid for by the water fund. 80% of that position will be funded, if approved, by the sanitary sewer fund. And again, the master plan condition assessment rate and fee study. One thing that I did want to point out, on this particular budget, you can see contractual services. There is a line item increase, but there is an offsetting capital expense lower 2020 proposed versus 2019 budget. The primary reason for that is because we are looking at the costs that are truly capital project related versus treatment related. So there is a classification of costs that is making that difference apparent in the 2019 versus 2020 proposed budget. So for capital projects specifically, you can see the largest requests in this number. The remainder of the difference in the capital is the offsetting costs of trying to reclassify. You can see the largest piece of the capital request within the sanitary sewer fund is our share in the South Platte Water Renewal Partners capital requests, and Peter will be talking and has talked about that list in the joint session that occurred about a month ago as well. The storm drainage fund. So the priorities and initiatives for this fund are the GIS field data collection program, a system-wide pipe cleaning program, and developing a system maintenance plan. Again, the utility billing system will also touch the storm drainage fund, the master plan condition assessment, the rate and fee study, and then also to evaluate all the administrative and personnel needs. You can see the staffing changes that are proposed. There are 2 Maintenance Tech 1 positions that are proposed within the Storm Drainage Fund, and there's also a project manager's position. The infrastructure condition assessment also of $100,000. You can see that the total budget is proposed to increase by $360,000, and the majority of that is covered in what I've just discussed. And the capital requests, so this is under discussion, as we all know, so there is a to be determined. So the storm drainage system rehabilitation and replacement, you can see the specifics for the new billing software, the master plan, and the rate and fee study. Okay. With that, I'll turn it over to Peter.
Great, thank you, Maria. Okay, so this will be a review from what we talked about a month ago. It's the same information that you were presented with. And so if you recall, what we talked about was we had some major priorities being the financial plan, and you saw the results of where we're at on that. We have a 10-year financial plan that's put together now we've been working with both cities on to ensure that we can hit our 5-year capital needs for Reg 85 and our 10-year capital needs, and ultimately our Reg 31 capital needs, which is 20 years down the road. However, those are big, significant improvements that we need to do to meet those regulations. And so that's the second bullet, is the Reg 85 requirements, and then ultimately the Reg 31 requirements. We have asset replacement based on condition of our plant assets. We've got deferred maintenance that we'll be addressing so that within the next 5-year period, we can address those deferred maintenance issues and get our assets to an acceptable industry standard. Our infrastructure repairs go along with that. We have safety and security. I think if you all remember the story I told you about our fire alarm system, which we're in the process of working on, that is coupled with a larger assessment of safety and security throughout the entire plant site. We have a lot of fence line that is not cameraed, and we have had issues in over this past year that we want to get a security assessment together to understand what our needs should be and then phase those improvements over time. And then ultimately we talked about plant resiliency and ensuring that our plant is able to survive unique circumstances or emergencies, and we're able to still keep as much of the plant running as possible if there's some kind of a disaster or some kind of an emergency that is significant and more regional in nature. The main thing that we're working on right now is that rate and fee assessment, which that cost of service study is on its way and will be forwarded to both cities when it is ultimately complete. We don't have any FTE changes or anything like that. We're good from an FTE perspective. And then ultimately we looked at, this is the total capital request. And so you can see the numbers 13.698 million. So that looks really, really big, but if you recall, that's split 50-50 between the two cities. And then the funding comes not just from the cities themselves, but from those 19 connector districts, of which 11 are connectors through Englewood. And so it's a big number, but it's serving a regional population of 300,000, and it's funneled through the two city budgets, and that's why it is such a substantial number. And I think that covers it for, yep. So I will turn that back over to Maria.
Okay. So we'll move forward. We are now talking about the capital project funds specifically. Funds 30, 31, and 34. So we started this year with a balance of 22 million. And you can see what our estimated sources are. And again, these are sources that we discussed in the springtime. Our estimated uses are approximately 23 million, leaving a balance at the end of this year estimated to be approximately 6.7 million. Our proposed sources for next year are 4.6 million, and our proposed uses are 10.3 million. So our forecasted 2020 December 31 balance just over $1 million. So we have, I specifically point out on the bottom of this slide the requested amounts, and we have talked about those two funds in previous conversations and the projects related to those as well, totaling 7.2 million. And the projects are broken out for you as well by department within the package in case there are questions still remaining on those. But this has been information that has been shared as the proposed project list for next year within the capital projects funds. And this is the capital projects fund. So I just displayed the PIF, and then this is the capital project fund. But those totals are included in the 7.2 million. And we would like to talk about the special revenue funds next. The special revenue funds include the Conservation Trust Fund, the Donors Fund, the Parks and Rec Trust Fund, the Malley Center Trust Fund, and the Open Space Fund. And I know I'm being very repetitive, but we talked about the sources of those funds in early spring as well. So you can see the balance that we had at the beginning of 2019 and our estimated sources. So our balance was just under 5 million, 4.9 million. Estimated sources 1.5 million. Estimated uses this year of almost 4 million. So we expect our balance at the end of this year to be 2.4. Our proposed sources next year, 1.7 million, and our proposed uses, 1.7 million, with a balance, proposed balance at the end of December and estimated to be approximately 2.4 million. So not significant changes for the special revenue funds proposed for next year. Included in the packet is also a list of the recommended projects that actually do reflect and partially in those uses that you just saw. So you can see for the Conservation Trust Fund, the recommended projects. The open space funds totaling $860 million, and I should have pointed out that our Conservation Trust Fund recommended project list was approximately $318,000. Open space funds, $860,000. And finally, debt service funds. So we have the recreational general obligation bond. You can see where the status of that fund is at and what we expect to pay out next year. Those actually are the bonds that will expire, I believe, in 2023. So, and then the police GO bond as well, and you can see the status of that fund. So we expect that we'll be continuing to lower those funds as we move forward closer to the expiration of that debt. Okay, and we have one more set, the internal service funds, that include the Central Services Fund, which will be closed out by the end of 2019, and any costs associated with metered postage or copying, printing, et cetera, will be included in the, or is included currently in the IT departmental budget that was proposed. And the costs related to any mail delivery services that were in that fund are moved into the Parks, Recreation, and Library Department budget that was also proposed as part of the general fund budget. So the internal funds also include the service center, and you can see that the balance that is proposed, I'm not going to go through every line item, at the end of 2019 was proposed to be approximately 2.5, and you can see with proposed sources and uses, the balance doesn't change significantly, or is not proposed to be changed by the end of 2020. The Capital Equipment Replacement Fund, you can see that we started the year with approximately $3.2 million, with sources of $980,000 approximately, with uses of about 1.5. And then our forecast at the end of the year is 2.7 million. Proposed sources next year, 845, with proposed uses of 2,222,000. And the reason that I'm pointing this out, you can see that the balance that is projected for this year, it does go down next year, because we are using a portion, or we are proposing to use a portion of that fund balance. And again, we are looking at vehicles and the replacement, the life cycle and the replacement, and Maria can certainly speak to any questions that you may have about that. But there is a program in place to look at the vehicles, so there is added expense next year. The Risk Management Fund and the Employee Benefit Funds are also within our internal services funds, and you can see that the balances, except for the Employee Benefit Funds, the Risk Management Fund is proposed to be equal to this year's fund balance. The Employee Benefit Funds, this will be updated, and we had a large discussion last week, regarding kind of where we stood with our negotiations with our providers. And so as we progress, we'll talk a little bit more about the impact to the Employee Benefit Fund as we get closer to finalization of a contract with a provider. So next steps. So we are here tonight to, again, look for your advice regarding the proposed budget. We are preparing to print a 2020 proposed budget document in preparation for having it available by September 6th online. So in preparation again for the public hearing that will be held on September 16th. We are looking to finalize all changes that we have in response to any comments that council would like to make in a budget workshop on September 23rd. So we would incorporate any changes that you would recommend based on input from the public, or additional changes to estimates that staff may have to bring forth because we are in the process of refining some of the numbers. Other than the benefits, I don't recall anything large at this point. I'd make you aware. And then we're working towards the October 7th and October 21st dates for the first and second readings of the budget. So that is what I have for this evening, and with that, I'd like to open it up to any questions.
Thank you for your information and the slides. I have a quick question. So before we start out, on September 6th, it's a Friday, right? That the online will be available to everyone. So if we were to have a study session on the 9th to go over anything and have last minutes, do you think that's doable? Would it be early Friday or later Friday or?
I actually believe that we could be prepared to have a study session on the 9th. I think that's actually a good suggestion because we would be able to bring forth the changes in the benefit rate because we are in the process of negotiating those, so we'll have a better indication.
Okay, great, because I've been a little bit concerned. We've had a lot of meetings, but it always condenses at the end, and it seems to me like, and I, for one, I wasn't here last Monday. I was listening on phone, and I've had a few conversations with the city manager. I would love to see us, at least in the general fund, get the operational thing balanced so that it's not going into a deficit mode and then pulling from the reserves, and I'd like to see us move in that direction if we can. I have some ideas I'll bring up during mayor choice tonight, but the same with enterprise, although I'm less worried about this because as long as we're getting infrastructure stuff done that's been so lacking, that this is a place I'm more willing to do it. But I would like to have time for us when we do. We had a lot of questions last week. I think we need another study session to go over some. So I'll open it up for questions now. Councilmember Sierra.
One question apiece, or?
Yeah, let's do that. Thank you for the reminder. Thanks for the reminder. Let's do one apiece, keep going rapid fire, and we'll hopefully get everybody through all of them.
So actually, I'll start off with just a question for Director DeAndre, and I'm glad that this was brought up during the section of the Storm Drainage Fund because I forgot to ask this question last week. But the two maintenance tech positions as well as the project manager, that is, their only responsibility is really going to fall under the Stormwater Drainage Fund, and none of their duties are actually going to involve aspects that would be counted against the general fund. Am I correct in that assumption?
That is correct. So we talked last Monday about the two maintenance tech positions and actually even getting them started this year on that cleaning. The projects manager we would bring on, we would start that hiring process in late 2019 and to kick them off in 2020.
Thank you. I have also a question for Director DeAndre. The infrastructure condition assessment, is that the same as the asset management program we were talking about last time?
Yes, on
Okay.
that same slide, that should say the condition assessment / master plan.
Okay, so
My
it's the same
mistake for
thing.
not catching that. Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure it was the same thing. I wasn't sure if it was the same or different, so awesome, thanks.
Other questions? Mayor Pro Tem Russell.
So why do we need a seasonal utilities billing specialist position?
Did you hear the question, Maria?
Yeah, I think just talking to staff, the feeling was, and with former utilities director Tom Brennan, put that in there because of the seasonal nature of the seasonal being when we send out the utility bills to the various connector districts, that there's a higher workload that requires some additional assistance from staffing to prepare all those bills and get them either sent to the connector districts or actually mail them out.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Councilmember Barentine.
Since the charter requires that we have a 5-year history, wouldn't it be helpful if we did that same process when we're going through the budget piece as well, so that we can have that comparison?
Are you referring to the charter? I would have to look to see what the charter requirement is. Are you asking for 5-year of revenue and expenditure history?
I believe that's what's in the charter that has to be, when we present the budget. So it just would be helpful as we're going through the process for the budget to have that same kind of thing going on.
So in the proposed draft of the budget that will be presented, it will be included. The proposed
you.
budget will be presented in a public hearing on September 16th with that information included. I'll reword that.
I appreciate that because that's per the charter, but what I'm asking is, wouldn't something similar to that be a little helpful as we're going through this process? Might just want to think about that rather than just the 1 year there. Thanks.
Thank you.
Councilmember Questa.
Thank you, Mayor. Director, looking at slide 19, which is titled South Platte Water Renewal Partners 2020 Capital Request, and then it's got the list of about 15. And pardon me if this was discussed last week, I don't recall hearing it. How could you prioritize these? Is every single one of these make or break? Would you have to have every single one of these items on that list of 15?
Well, I think the list of 15 is based on the master plan and that 5-year capital program that we put in place. And so that 5-year capital program is something that we put forth because based on our study, that's what we believe is necessary to keep the plant in an operational state that that will help address some of the deferred maintenance that was required. I think there is an opportunity if we need to look at some of those projects. However, what happens is then you slip back into this whole approach of deferring maintenance again.
Sure.
And I think the goal was through that whole, if you recall during that process, when we looked at the 5-year capital plan from last year was at 70 million, and now we're at 58.5. The plan was to try and optimize that program as much as possible to make sure that we're not getting behind from a capital or from an asset perspective, and we're also handling the regulatory requirements. And so that's the most optimized plan that we have to date. In any of these kinds of capital planning processes, we look at them year over year over year. It's not a one-shot deal and then we don't look at it again. We're constantly looking at those things and evaluating those things, and sometimes things will delay because of project workload is too much, and so we might push it out a year. Sometimes we'll start things later in the year as opposed to earlier in the year to allow cash flow to ensure that we've collected enough revenue to maintain those things. So right now the plan itself is the program, the projects that we determine through that planning process as the necessary projects. But we can always look at those and further optimize as necessary.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mayor.
Mayor Pro Tem Russell. Is it on?
My light is on.
Yeah, I know. I see
Thank you.
that.
When is the last time we've done an assessment of the system, the water fund, sewer fund, and storm sewer fund?
So I don't know the answer to that. So I would defer to anybody else at the table who might know the answer to that.
I do not know the answer to that either.
We have not identified a previous study that I'm aware of.
Yeah, so I think that's part of the issue is that we haven't had a comprehensive look at things in any time period that any of us have been able to find. And so without that comprehensive look at the system, you don't know where to start to prioritize things. And so that's the reason for taking this step back, understand what the issues are, and then once we know what those issues are, we prioritize them. Because there's no way, it's not something we can address in a year or 2 years. This is a multi-year program that ultimately, again, whenever we do this kind of planning work, we look at those on a recurring basis. So it's either, and you look at them annually, and then generally a good utility program will do a comprehensive reassessment of a master plan about every 5 years. And so they'll take a step back and say, okay, so are we on track with the plan? What has changed from a regulatory environment? What do we know we've gathered from doing actual projects? Did we uncover some other problem? And so we look at them yearly to make sure that we're on track. And then ultimately, the program that the city ideally would get on is that about every 5 years, we're looking at a comprehensive analysis of all three of those systems.
Thank you.
Can I follow up on that by asking, have you tried to contact former staff and maybe Director Stu Fonda or somebody that might be able to give you some background?
I have not.
Okay. It might be useful to find out, maybe they did it a different way and we just don't know what they did.
I think Attorney David Robbins still has contact with
Yeah.
Stu Fonda, so we might be able to.
That'd be a great
I
way.
might be able to connect through David.
Okay. Councilmember Sierra.
So I was the one that asked that question in advance of this meeting about just my concern about the deficits. And really what I guess I should have added a little bit more to the question was, what makes it difficult for us, and obviously the public as well, is that there's really nothing in this packet that really tells us what the capital project plan is for any of these funds. So we're not sure whether any of these deficits are a one-time cost or a recurring cost, if we expect to see these type of costs again in the 2021 budget or further on. So I think, I saw it for some of them, but I don't think I saw it for some of the smaller funds. So I guess, obviously, if you look at the water fund, there's something there that states routine maintenance. So I'm expecting that 1.1 million, we're going to see again in the 2021 budget. But how many of these are actually just one-time costs versus how many are these going to be reoccurring costs? So that was the reason why I brought up the question, is that obviously it's not sustainable if we're going to be running these deficits year over year in the future. So I guess that's more of a comment than a question.
If you want, I can-
Okay, so I can go through the list and we can kind of talk about them one by one if you'd like. I do have some information related to some of them, but do you want to address the
Yeah.
questions on the?
Yeah, and I think that's part of what we're trying to assess. And so if you recall when you were back at the plant a month ago, we have that 10-year financial plan, which is very detailed and really looks at what the needs are and basically smooths out those capital needs such that you're not hitting these big spikes and valleys. And that process is what we're trying to translate over to the three funds. And so it's hard to say right now because we don't have an understanding of how the total system conditions are comprehensively. So we don't have that comprehensively in one place where we then prioritize planning, put together projects in a prioritized way, and then develop that financial plan. So that's really what we're doing right now. We're really digging into being able to bring to council in information that allows much more understanding of the system needs.
That's over a 10-year period that you're talking about as well, right?
Yeah, we'll do, typically when you do a master plan, you'll do a more immediate term of 5 years, you do a 10-year, and then we'll plan for what a 20-year is. But oftentimes, when you get 20 years out, the numbers are really, we're making some pretty substantial guesses. And 10 years from now, we should have a better handle of what those numbers are. But we use them as indicators so that we know long range what we're looking for. But generally, the financial funding is based on a 10-year financial plan, and that rolls every year.
Director Sobota, did you want to add?
I did. So I wanted to make sure if we can answer the question tonight. Specifically, so Peter's talked about the first three. The golf course is relatively on target. The concrete utility fund, so the source is 880, the use is 1.1, the use is 1 next year. Would that be one that you'd be asking a question about specifically?
Well, obviously, the big concern are going to be with the big three, the 40, 41, and 42. But then also when you look down at some of the smaller ones, the special revenue, or I'm trying to think what the name of those are. But nothing in there really stipulates whether or not those are going to be, do we expect to see a $1.5 million hit for one of those funds again next year?
Yeah.
Because obviously at that point, we're probably going to be out of funds within that specific fund, so.
So if there was a specific fund that we had a question about, perhaps there would be, like, I know Director Hargrove is here specifically, she could answer a specific question, or do you want us to take that offline? Because they are relatively smaller funds.
Right. I think the big conversation is going to be on these other, the bigger ones. So I guess we can hold off on that question,
Okay,
since we got about 20.
okay. Point taken, and we'll, when we come back to talk about the budget, we can answer that question. Would that be all right? Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Councilmember Berentine.
I think to Councilmember Sierra's point, we have several comments that have already been made. That was in the presentation in May. That was discussed at the meeting, at the joint meeting last month. And I think what's necessary for us and for the public is to have that included in these presentations so that somebody doesn't have to go back 3 or 4 months, so that there's some kind of fluidity to it, some context to the information that you're providing, so it doesn't seem like it's so anecdotal. So if somebody were to go back and say, this was the precursor to our budget, this is us working out the budget, this isn't giving the information, and so maybe even under those bullet points, just a little bit of the anecdotal stuff that you're giving, this is what this is for, this is what this money is for, but that's not being included in here, so it doesn't put the context that I think the public would need in there. And then, wasn't there an increase? Have there been no increases in any of these funds over the period of time that you're aware of?
No, there was an increase in the sewer fund last year for 7%.
And that was done by this council. Prior to that, when was the last increase?
You know, I don't know that off the top of my head, but I'm sure we could get that information. It
Unfortunately-
happened prior to me being here.
Yeah, unfortunately, I do remember quite a lengthy process by the council going through this, at least when I was on council before. So whether they continued to do that after I was off council the first time or not, I don't know. But there was a process, a fee schedule, how we were going to increase it. And I guarantee you that they increased. So if I know that it existed, so if we could kind of look at some of that process for how they did those increases and how they made that determination. Sure. Part of that was in the huge conversation that we had about tap fees and what we were going to charge as well, and how we were doing certain increases and other things as well. So we might want to look at that.
Thank you. Councilmember Cuesta, and then Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. And this follows up on those 15 projects I was just asking about in my prior question. And so those total up to 13.6 million. You reminded us that that's split between the two cities. So Inglewood and Littleton would share about 6.8, give or take. But then you mentioned the 19 connector districts in their contributions that would be made as well. Can you put a figure on that of what that would be, even an estimate?
Okay, so this will be a really rough estimate because I have not done that analysis, and I think we can. I'll do it based on population.
Please.
So, Englewood's generally about 35,000 people. The total population served by the plant is 300,000 people. So it's generally whatever the total budget for the plant is right around 11% City of Englewood. And again, these are very general numbers. And so if you take the total amount of the 13.7 million, then it would be about 1.4, 1.5 million that's directly attributable to the City of Englewood residents. And then the rest of it is either funded by Littleton and their connector districts, or the other 11 connector districts that's through the City of Englewood.
And that makes it pretty straightforward then. So this 13.6, and if we were the nice round number of 10%, call it,
Sure.
Inglewood's would be brought down to 1.37 million.
Generally.
Just to use that
Yeah.
round number.
I think it's a good indicator number. The issue with, and where I'm hedging a little bit is because as you go into each one of the connector districts, the way the agreement was set up from a funding perspective is not. We'd have to go and analyze each connector district to ensure that we knew exactly what the proportionate percentage was based on the flow percentage and the capital percentage. So when I say if we're using round numbers, that's an indicator number. And so I hesitate to put a firm stamp on 1.3 million, but it's generally about that.
You wouldn't see 1.3 million becoming 2.6. You wouldn't see some substantial jump.
No, I mean that would be a doubling of the capital
Okay.
program. And if you recall, we have it such that the capital the capital needs for the plan are generally fall between 11 and 14 million over the next 5 years, and that totals at 58.5. And so it would have to go from 13 million to 26 million to double the amount on the city of Englewood.
And needless to say, this would be for, I imagine, just about any citizen. 1.3 is far more palatable than 13. And so sometimes I think it's the way those numbers are presented. So I appreciate you giving that analysis of it and kind of breaking that down a little bit. Thanks, sir.
Yeah, they do look very big if you're just looking at them as a 35,000 person city, and that's where understanding the overall region.
To piggyback up on, could we get that annotation there so that people know? Is there a way to annotate that
Yeah,
budget number by chance? I think that's actually what Councilmember Barentine might be asking for too, is that there be some annotation in some of these so that it's understood what the context is. Member Questa, is that sort of what you're, or would that be helpful? Okay.
I think we could, and the other thing I think we can do, and we haven't, I think we can get a better estimate of what that total number is as opposed to just basing on the population percentage. I think we can look at each connector district and get an estimate of how that translates in terms of what's a funded cost from the connector district.
Mayor Pro Tem.
At the bottom of page 5, under enterprise funds, it says the sewer fund proposed sources includes a 7% fee increase in 2020. Is that in addition to the fee increase we've already had, or is that just a continuation of that same fee?
No, that's an additional 7% on. So last year there was a 7% increase. This year there's another 7% increase.
So, so it'll be multiplying. It will, the 7% this time will be also on the 7% that was added last time.
That's correct.
That's correct.
Okay, so compounding. And just one quick question. The rate study will also assess whether the connector districts are paying their fair share, since the cities, Littleton and Englewood, are paying for the plant improvements themselves.
And that, yes, that is part of what we're looking at is understanding how the connector districts are funding, and so the cost of service will look at what the needs are, and then when we get to the sewer fund rate and fee study, that's when we'll look at, are the connector districts proportionally paying what to fund the capital, or fund the plant itself, and make sure that those are consistent. Part of the challenge is there might be unique circumstances or unique provisions in each one of those connector districts, and that's what we have to understand, because they're not consistent. And so we're trying to get them as consistent and uniform as possible, but that's, part of that may or may not be possible.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I have a question about on slide 17 on the 2020 priorities initiatives. Last week we had a charrette, and some of your staff were there. Director Van Rye, I think, from the South Platte Water Renewal Partners, and it was a charrette on the South Platte River and ways to improve the things that they're moving forward on. And one of the things around safety and security that came up was a question about what happens with the Platte and how that impacts some of the things that you guys are doing around testing and when it's safe, when it's not safe, and where would be access points if we were to develop new access points for the public. Would that impact the plant? Have you all been thinking about that in terms of the safety piece to very deeply on this yet?
Well, yeah, and I think where it originated from was earlier this year when the encampments were when there was a substantial number. It got to the point where I stopped my staff from going down, because they were getting to the point where they were interacting and it wasn't safe. So if we needed to do a sample, we would go and get a police escort to do it. Now that issue is largely not there anymore, that safety concern, which was a driver earlier during the winter and this spring, is no longer a driver as long as that corridor remains free from the camps.
So if it's open to the public with a little bit more activity, you don't see, well, I guess I'm just suggesting when you're talking about safety, at least take a look at that and see what the working group is doing to make sure that it's in line with what you all need there for safety and security, because I don't know what those things might be.
Sure.
Because I think we could have actually more access to the river in ways to open it up more broadly to the public for recreation and, you know,
Yeah, and if it-
second bike path that's long down the road, but,
I would be less concerned about that.
okay, good. That's good to hear. We were hoping. Councilmember Berentine.
Partially to follow up on both the Councilmember Sierra and Cuesta's question, if the improvements we make, because you're saying that some of the capital improvements we may not be able to recover from our partners, and if it's owed, we are responsible for that. We have to pay it regardless of whether those connector districts pony up or through their contract can pay that or not.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that they wouldn't be funding it. I think they are funding it. I just don't know what the mechanisms, they aren't necessarily identical mechanisms between the each one of the connector districts. That's what we're assessing. And so it's not a matter of they're not funding, it's a matter of are they consistent in how they're funding, if that makes sense.
And how much they're funding.
And how much they're funding, exactly.
Which can be per contract, per each individual one. There's some flexibility in what's going on there, so you can't say that what they're totally funding yet until you take a look at that piece of it.
That's true.
Okay, but in the end, once we build it, we have to pay for it. We're hoping that'll be made up for.
Yeah, in the end, the way the cost of service and the rate and the fee study comprehensively looks is it translates to the connector districts what their proportionate share is for the needs at the plant.
Okay, and what the answers that I read between Inglewood and Littleton going back and forth on how they amassed a 17 million, it was actually, I think, 27 million a couple of years ago. They probably paid for the biogas and cash and stuff, but it's about 17 million now. How they amassed that was just kind of handed off, that they just charge these outrageous tap fees and have garnered all of this money. Are we looking at increasing our tap fees?
So we are looking at all of it, yes. And so the tap fees would be a piece that, so tap fee analysis has to be defendable, and so that's what we're doing for the treatment plant right now. We're in the process right now of doing that tap fee piece for the treatment portion of the sewer tap fee. And then ultimately we'll do the same kind of thing for the total tap fee for the sewer fund itself. And so this is a piece that'll integrate into that sewer fund.
So, because we had that discussion before, Littleton obviously made a decision that theirs were defendable and charged a lot more. I don't think that's all of how they amassed it, but they charged a lot more, and we apparently didn't think ours was defendable. So if we could get a little bit more information on how that all came about, because I think it might have been just a little skimmed over for the paper, but that's all people know about it right now. So if we could get that as part of it, because if we need to do it this time and we can amass that kind of money while construction is still hot, because we do tap fees for more than just the city boundaries of Inglewood.
That's correct.
Just like Littleton does. So it's not just the construction that's going on here. So I think that's really a very timely piece that we need to make sure we consider in this budget. Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree that there's a revenue opportunity that we want to make sure that we are capturing the right amount of revenue. And I think that's the work that Director Sobota is working on relative to understanding where Littleton's funding came from. The other thing that Littleton had was there was some of their districts experienced a higher level of growth, and so that creates more revenue. But we will look at it. That's what we're looking at.
I pushed my button. I have maybe one more question, and then I know we need to go next door. And this might be Assistant City Manager, Deputy City Manager Hargrove. But, and I don't know if I saw it. Is our share back fund clear in here? How much do we get from the share back fund?
Thank you. The share back on an annual basis is about $800,000 from Arapahoe County Open Spaces every year.
And that's based on per capita, is that how it's?
Yes, it's
a-
population-based.
Yeah, okay, great. That's helpful. I thought it was under 1 million, but I was hoping it was more.
And the grants that we receive are on top of that 800,000 when we're able to get the grants.
Okay, okay, that's how that works. So it's grants over and above, and we've gotten way more
Yes.
than the share back than this
Yes.
last year and years past. Okay, great. It would be great to be able to, I think that we've put that in the citizen maybe in the past, but maybe not the fact that we have share back and these grants. I
I'll be
think-
happy to advertise that.
Yeah, I know,
more and
you,
say thank you.
you, it's close to my heart too. So I would love to see those and how much we get from that whole thing. But I know that's not dependable, those grants, but we've done a good job of those.
But the share back is pretty dependable, so thank you for
Yes,
asking that
it's-
question.
It's really mandated, isn't it? They have
Yes,
to do it. So-
yes.
All right. Any further questions? Council, as we said last week, if you have questions, further things that your mind gets joggled with at any point in the day, please send them along to the city manager and Director Sobota, and they will continue to pull whatever information you thought, oh, I would really like to know this too. So I think we only had one council member, maybe two, take advantage of that last week, but please do that, and then they'll put it out to all of us so that we know what the answers are. Great, thank you. See you next door.